Chapter 11, in which wisdom is proven to be a tricky customer indeed. So we have seen the first battle with Pitch, the Nightmare King. Yeah, I guess you could call him a king. So the first battle has transpired. Nikolas St. North suffers some grievous wounding, but he's still alive. Ombric and the village begin to care for him. And this is where the whole theme of this series, as far as I'm concerned, begins to unfold itself. And that is the power of love. Chapter 11, in which wisdom is proven to be a tricky customer indeed. Days passed as North drifted in and out of consciousness in Big Root. Am I actually inside a tree? Is it the very same tree I'd seen fighting the bear? A tree that fought a bear? North wasn't one to believe in magic. He believed only in his cunning mind and sureness with the blade, and yet he had allowed himself to follow a crazy dream of treasure. He had ridden over water and clouds on a 1,200-pound horse and had turned his back on the riches that had doomed his men. These acts defied explanation, and now here he was in a bed that seemed to understand his every thought or need. When he was uncomfortable, it adjusted and propped him up. When his bandaged legs ached, the bed gently kneaded at them until they felt better. Food and drink hovered in the air beside him, though he was still too weak to even reach for them. But there was always a steady parade of 3 or 4 curious children, always bickering with one another over who got to spread jam on his toast, who got to hold a mug of hot broth or cooling honey water to his lips, and what seemed to cause the most heated arguments among the children, that is, who got to feed his horse. But the more North rested, the more his mind wondered and marveled at the many impossible things that had occurred. The most impossible was that the wizard, the one he'd seen the bear devour, had survived. How can this be? His name, North learned, was Ombric, and he was alive and whole. He was applying elixirs and ointments and fussing over North as often as those children did. What a yammering bunch they were. Some days, the bad days, the days when the aches of wounds healing brought on fevers, their conversation seemed insane. Messages from insects, creatures called fearlings, and a man in the moon. But slowly, North started to piece together the snatches of bizarre conversations. Then one morning, he woke to find a little girl, the one who seemed to sit most often by his bedside, slipping a tiny hand-sewn book of pictures next to his pillow. He feigned sleep until she left the room. Then he lifted the small volume and sifted through the pages. They were filled with charcoal drawings of shadowy creatures and the black bear and himself guarding the children as if they were the czar of Russia's treasures. There were sketches of a baby in a ship that sailed the heavens, of a battle on the moon, and of a great villain who brought darkness and doom. The tale was swirling in his head, colliding with what he remembered from that early morning duel, and filling in the gaps of what he'd once thought impossible and now believed was true. Had he really stopped that bear? The children assured him he had. The children explained that a demon named Pitch, the Nightmare King, had come for them to take away their dreams. His minions, the fearlings, hadn't been able to sneak into Santov Clausen. The moonbeams were too effective at stopping them during the night. That Ombric fellow had figured out that Pitch couldn't attack during the day, since his defeat centuries ago Neither he nor his fearlings could tolerate the light of the moon or the sun, so Pitch had possessed the village's bear, forced him to do whatever he commanded. It seemed a perfect choice. Being inside the bear was an ideal shield against light and was powerful enough to fight Ombric. Best of all, he would be trusted by the villagers. He was their friend. To North, it all sounded like madness. Nightmare kings, enchanted forests. Then North thought more about the dream that had brought him to Santa Claus in the first place. It made him wonder, how could a dream show him a place he had never seen? One day he felt strong enough to ask Ombric. The wizard's left eyebrow rose and he tried to suppress a smile. The children had noticed that Ombric had been almost smiling a great deal as the wounded bandit's condition improved. I asked the man in the moon for help, Ombric explained, lifting off, then replacing a bandage on North's shin. He gave you the dream. He thought you could be of assistance. It was North's turn to raise his eyebrows. Me? He laughed out loud. I'm better known for assisting gold pieces from a potentate's pocket than assisting moon man wizards and little brats. Ombric pursed his lips in amusement. Perhaps he thought the king of the bandits would be a worthy foe for the Nightmare King. Well, North thought, that's an answer worth considering. King of the bandits had a pleasing ring to it. Then Ombric added, but I suspect it was more than that. North was puzzled by the remark. And what in all these crazy worlds could that be? I'm a thief. Ombric rubbed at the jagged crack in his staff. Face the facts, my young friend. The forest that surrounds our village can clear a path only for the good of heart. Only for the good of heart. You alone rejected the gold the spirit of the forest offered you. That never would have happened with a real bandit. Not a real bandit, North thought angrily. Why, I am the greatest thief alive, perhaps in all of history. But these thoughts felt suddenly hollow and somehow false. What was happening to him? You, or this place, or that spirit, have bewitched me, he bellowed. I am Nikolas St. North, the bandit king. Nothing more, nothing less. No wizard or spirit has the power to change the human heart, Ombric replied with great calm. Liar, shouted North. Over the angry exchange, the tiny voice of Catherine broke through. But you were also our hero. She looked at him with more strength and purpose than he thought any child was capable of. We were so afraid. And then you came. North looked at Catherine and at the other children who'd come closer as his anger had flared. There was something in their faces that he was barely beginning to fathom, something he had never seen before. Kindness. And though he fought it, he was soothed. His pain eased, not just the pain of battle wounds, but the wounds he'd always ignored, the deep, lonely hurt of a loveless life. The wounds he had always ignored, the deep, lonely hurt of a loveless life. North was quiet. Days went by without his saying a single word. The other children came and went, but Catherine always stayed. He learned she was a foundling. Her parents were trying to get to Santa Claus, and they had become lost in a terrible blizzard outside the forest rim. They'd perished in the cold. But Catherine, just a toddler then, had stumbled to the edge of the forest. The trees took pity on her and, with their roots, lifted her up, passing her from tree to tree and vine to vine. The animals had joined in. First, the animals had joined in. First, a band of squirrels and chipmunks, then the reindeer, and finally the bear himself, who brought her to Ombric's front door. From that night on, she had lived in Big Root. Her steady kindness to North was his greatest comfort and worst torment. He saw himself in her. He knew what it was like to be lost, and this haunted him. As he continued to heal, he seemed to withdraw even further. North saw within the child's serious gray eyes a need, a hope, a wish that he'd fought since he could remember. What do you think? North saw within the child's serious gray eyes a need, a hope, a wish that he'd fought since he could remember. To have a friend. To have a friend. His life had been so hard and ruthless. Friendship meant trusting someone, and that was a luxury he had never enjoyed, but he slowly began to soften. What danger could this little girl possibly pose? She wasn't a Cossack or a thief. She was just a lonely little girl. One morning, after Catherine had cleared a mug of elderberry soup that he had not touched, North finally spoke. "Thank you, Catherine," he said, his voice a little raspy from being quiet so long. Catherine looked at him with that clear-eyed gaze that seemed to see right through him. "Just rest, Mr. North," she told him, a hint of a smile curling onto her lips as she resumed her post at the foot of his bed. They didn't need to say another word. Friends don't need to. Friends don't need to. They didn't need to say another word. Friends don't need to. Chapter 12. Another short but intriguing episode. While North recovered in Big Root, the spectral boy rollicked across the planet as he pleased, from the wilds of Canada to the Himalayas to Arabian desert sands, riding on the wind or on fleets of clouds he could commandeer at his whim. He could outrun any moonbeam and took prankish pleasure in hiding from them. He could never sit still for long. It was as if he'd been locked inside for 10,000 rainy days, which wasn't far from the truth. Being locked inside Pitch's cold heart had been like a prison. Still, it wasn't the dagger that kept Pitch paralyzed all that time, but the goodness of that spectral boy. The boy thawed the tiny fragment of goodness that still lived inside Pitch and kept his evil frozen, unable to act. A little bit of goodness can be very powerful against evil, but the boy needed light and warmth and life. He could not bear the burden of stunting Pitch forever. His glow would eventually weaken and die, and Pitch would have walked again. But now the spectral boy was free. He needed to just go, to see whatever seized his attention. This earth was new to him, and he looked upon it in very simple terms. Things were either good or bad. Riding clouds was good. Fearlings and nightmare men were bad. He thought of people almost as simply. There were small ones, children. They were good and fun. They were playful and wild like himself. As for the tall ones, grown-ups, his feelings were more complicated. Some were good and some were definitely bad. And Pitch was worse than bad. Pitch meant to harm all small ones, especially those in Santoff Clausen. The boy wasn't exactly sure why Pitch wanted to hurt them, but he was sure that it wasn't fair or right. He thought it might be that they were so strong and happy that they never had nightmares. So no matter where he was or what far-flung corner of the planet he was exploring, come night, he would rush back to the village and hide near Big Root, watching and waiting. He noticed that the tall one named North had stayed in the village. He liked North a good deal. He was brave and strong and always kind to the small ones. But there was something else about North that intrigued him. The old man named Ombric was teaching him how to do all sorts of fascinating things, magical things. The boy had once peered into the window of Big Root and saw North intently reading a thick book by the fireplace. Ombric was going over ledgers at a table nearby. Sleeping in her own little bed was the girl they called Catherine. He liked her too. She was very brave for a small one. The spectral boy had the oddest sensation, a memory of something familiar. Spectral boy. Maybe you have paper and you're drawing, or writing down your thoughts, or just making little decorative scribbles. The spectral boy had the oddest sensation, a memory of something familiar, something good. He didn't know the word for it. What he felt was friendship. Then the moonbeams arrived and caught his attention. They were ready for their game of chase. The clouds were waiting. It was time to play. But if Pitch or any of his kind returned to hurt these people, the boy would do his best to help them. Chapter 13. The warrior apprentice proves to be clever. Grandpa's tongue sometimes gets twisted around here. The warrior apprentice proves to be clever. Unlike the spectral boy, Nikolas St. North only thought he knew what it was like to be cooped up too long. He only thought he knew what it was like to be cooped up too long. Before a week was up, his bruisers hadn't even turned all the way from blue-black to yellow-green. He was back on his feet and doing 100 pull-ups at a time on a sturdy birch branch. He had the strength and determination of a herd of mustangs. North hadn't touched a saber since the battle with the bear. For the slightest thought of a weapon sent dark, troubling images bubbling up to his brain. Children cowering, claws raging, so much panic, screaming. Ombric had created Santoff Clausen as a sanctuary, and right now that was exactly what North needed. And so he took sanctuary in Ombric's books. To steal treasures from every country in Europe and the Russias, a bandit needed to read and speak in their various languages. So North had no trouble diving into ancient Italian texts or even Greek or Latin. What was remarkable was North's consuming fascination with spells and histories. And that Ombric even allowed the young man to study his books of magic. Their secrets were too powerful and could only be shared with those who Ombric thought would not be corrupted by their knowledge. Something about North interested the old wizard. He saw in him potential. Santoff Clausen had always been a charmed place, literally. For much longer than anyone could remember, Ombric had used all his powers and abilities to protect it from real evil. No thief, savage, or ruffian had ever successfully trespassed its defenses. Pitch, with his dark ways, was the first genuine wickedness the village had had to face. The experience had affected everyone, grown-ups, children, even the forest and its creatures. They went about their lives as they had before, but the freewheeling joys of the past came less easily now. The trees in the enchanted forest were ever watchful. The animals were skittish as they worried about every shadow. Even the spirit of the forest felt anxious. I have no power to use against Pitch, she sighed. My treasures are not to his liking. She's the one that spilled out all the coins and Pitch's men because they didn't have potential in their heart for kindness and love. They turned into stone. They do get set free at a certain point. The children were not sleeping well. Ombric felt at fault. I was too precious with this place, he confided in North. Kept too much of the harshness of life from making its way in. But the idea actually amused the wounded North. You did fine, old man, he reassured him, laughing. And though the children's parents were so distracted that virtually all inventing in the village had stopped, it was not so with North. He was growing more and more enchanted with the village and with the idea of enchantment. Spells, legerdemain, conjuring, all came quite naturally to him. And it did not take long for the villagers and Ombric himself to consider him the wizard's first and only apprentice. North quickly became masterful in the alchemical arts, making Big Root bustle with activity again, or with the explosion of a spell that didn't quite go right. He worked with gusto and regularly overstepped his new abilities without properly thinking things through. When created a ball that would never stop bouncing, he added too much bounce. After the ball hit the ground, it rocketed up to the sky with such force that it could easily have traveled to Mars. In another experiment, he tried to make a young cat stay forever kitten size. First, he accidentally shrunk the animal to the size of a microbe, then overcompensated. A regular sized kitten is cute, but one that is 12 feet tall is a problem. The cat tried to eat Petrov and the bear repeatedly, even after being returned to a normal size. The cat tried to eat Petrov and the bear repeatedly, even after being returned to normal size. This was all a welcome diversion for the village, a chance to laugh again. But North was not the type to take setbacks in stride. He fumed for days whenever things didn't go as he intended. Sometimes these angry moods would cause small catastrophes. Furniture would burst into flames, or very small thunderclouds, usually no bigger than a pillow, would follow North around until he calmed. Knowledge without wisdom, Ombric remarked sagely, watching the kitten leap after Petrov's tail, causing the horse to knock over a wagon. Knowledge without wisdom can get a bit messy. North knew the wizard wasn't trying to provoke him, but regardless, it felt like a challenge. No longer able to settle hard feelings with a duel or a round of arm wrestling, he instead went back to work, determined not to fail. Ombric admired his student's willingness to keep at it, despite the lad's outbursts of temper. But just like he'd been as an outlaw, North was also extravagantly cheerful and charming, and always ready with a story, especially for the children. If Ombric imparted knowledge and wonder to them, North was now their guide to adventure and good times. In fact, he was no longer a thief of treasures, but a buccaneer of fun. He regaled them with tall tales of his early life. He claimed to know of a kingdom governed by a giant egg that ruled from its perch atop an ancient wall. A giant egg atop an ancient wall. Don't know, does that sound familiar? He'd seen a cow that could jump higher than the Earth's atmosphere. Sound familiar? North's stories were as soothing a tonic to the battle-scarred children as anything Ombric could have concocted from a medicine bottle. And little Catherine was the most rapt of all, devouring his stories and scribbling versions of them in her journals. It was apparent that the children adored North, and subsequently so did their parents. As North continued on as the wizard's apprentice, he became interested in ways to combine Ombric's old magic with the curious mechanical devices that the villagers loved to build. It could be claimed that the birth of what we now call machines began in Santoff Clausen. There were mechanical brooms that could sweep indefinitely, small boxes that could fit over both ears and play music of one's choosing, special magnifying glasses that, when pointed at the sun, could focus the rays and actually cook food. North eyed these inventions with the glint of thievery in his eyes. Eyed those inventions with the glint of thievery in his eyes. I'd have stolen all the wealth in Asia, Europe, and Africa too, with any one of those toys, he told Ombric one morning at breakfast. The wizard looked at him quizzically. Catherine frowned. Don't worry, either of you. Those pastimes. Oh, Catherine frowned. And then Nikolas St. North went on. Don't worry, either of you. Those pastimes are behind me now. I have plans to make my own device, something truly new. Catherine was delighted. I know you'll do something grand. Her confidence in him quieted his boastfulness. He did, after all, want to please her. Ombric, however, felt a pang of unease. He knew that North liked to tease him, yet he sometimes worried, if I made the right choice? But one thing was certain. Nikolas St. North had brilliant imaginative instincts. With luck and guidance, the lad could achieve great things, things that Ombric could probably never imagine. Well, old boy, get ready for something you've never seen. I'm ready to combine man-made devices with your ancient hocus pocus, North proclaimed, levitating honey into Ombric's cup. The wizard regarded his apprentice carefully. He knew he was getting old, and his alchemy would need youth, newness, chance, and a change to stay magical. But there were some risks. Mix the old and new with caution. Remember, Nikolas, there can be dangers in the unknown. North nodded, receptive to the advice, but eager to begin. He had a fantastic idea, an idea that would change all their lives. And while he'd grown very fond of the old man, he found his caution amusing. He's been talking to bugs and reading books too long, he thought. Those bouncing balls and the giant kitten weren't so dangerous, and my new idea would pose no such risk. North knew exactly what his first experiment would be. He would make a mechanical man of magic, a robot genie that would do wonders, but only when commanded. Cook for them, clean, help the children with their studies, which North felt they spent far too much time doing. What could possibly go wrong with that? As for Ombric, he'd keep a watchful eye on his apprentice, but in truth, he was glad to have North distracted, and even more glad at how North occupied the children. For Ombric had important work to do, the most important work of his long life. He must find a way to stop Pitch. He knew full well that they had not defeated the Nightmare King completely. They had only checked him, like players in a game of chess, and the old wizard knew that the game was far from over. Chapter 14, wherein wizard and apprentice make discoveries that prove to be momentous. Making a mechanical man is not an easy task for any wizard, and North was still very much a student. But the construction of his robot genie had caught the interest of the entire village and further steadied the mood of Santov Close. Plans had to be drawn. Methods and materials were discussed, argued over, agreed upon. They toiled away in the workroom in Big Root. North consulted ancient scrolls and dusty texts he'd found in the darkest corner of Ombric's cupboard, and then discussed with the villagers the proper tensions of a pulley that would serve as an elbow or knee of the genie. The genie has to know us like a good horse knows its rider, North decided. He based his theory on an old trick for domesticated Siberian tigers who slept in nests of their master's clothes to safeguard against rebellion. Get me your lucky penny, your favorite rock, your mother's comb. I'll put them in the genie's chest. The children were in charge of assembling the precious trove. There were many debates over whether a shoe was more personal than a locket, or a pocket knife more cherished than a beloved pebble. After days of gathering valuables together, the children rushed to the workroom, treasures in hand. North carefully placed each item in a small hinged box. He was just about to tuck it into the cavity by the genie's heart when Catherine dashed up, waving a scrap of paper, a drawing of North himself. Will the genie know us both from this? She asked. North looked from the childish drawing to the small girl in front of him. He looked to the drawing again, at the detailing Catherine had added. He looked grand, noble, heroic even in the drawing. Was that how she saw him? He unhinged the box and carefully laid the paper on top of the other items, but in truth, he most wanted to fold it into his pocket and keep it for his own. He realized with the start that Catherine, in her quiet way, was waiting for a reply. Indeed it will, he assured her. It'll recognize the portrait and know whose hand has made it. At that, the children huddled close as he sealed the box and carefully placed it inside the genie's chest. Is it finished? Asked Fogg. Soon enough, North told him. He looked down proudly at his mechanical creation. Nearly 8 feet tall, it was shaped like a man, but entirely built of metal gears and clockwork, all in shades of metal. Nearly 8 feet tall, it was shaped like a man, but built entirely of metal gears and clockwork, all in shades of metal, silver, bronze, copper, gold, and darker tones like gunmetal and iron. It was strangely beautiful, like something that hadn't been made, but had been dreamed into being. Around the chest, shoulders, and joints were plates that resembled armor, but with intricate, graceful curves. The face and head were simply shaped, yet had a handsomeness that recalled a finely made toy. One slim metal key protruded from the area over the heart. That's how North intended to wind up the genie, he'd explained to the children. All told, there was a wondrous quality about it that surprised them all, especially North. He'd built weapons and shields before, but the robot genie was designed to do only good, and it looked the part. North fastened North fastened the last chest plate over the treasure box and turned the silver key 5, 6, 7 times. There was a soft, almost musical whir of sound. Then the robot genie sat up. It looked at them with a curious expression, not of surprise, but as if it had been expecting to see them and appeared to smile. North and the children erupted in cheers. "What is your command?" the genie asked in a smooth, measured voice. They were all caught off guard. A first command? They hadn't thought of what their first command would be. Then North spoke up. "Catherine, you may give the order." Catherine's eyes widened, a rosy glow creeping onto her cheeks. She thought for a moment. Then, in her most polite voice, she said, "I should like you, Genie, to walk outside, please." The genie nodded just as politely and did as she asked. The group followed the genie out the door of Big Root and into the light of day, and Nikolas St. North, for the first time in his wild, adventurous life, felt that he had done something truly fine. And here is the way Laura Geringer envisaged the genie to look. Outside, however, Ombric, however, was unaware of his pupil's success. He was locked inside his own room, lost in his studies. He had made considerable progress with the use of a millennium's worth of astrological records, along with charts yellowed with age and bits of stories and legends. He was able to piece together a plan he hoped would stop pitch. He discovered that 5 relics of the moon clipper had fallen to Earth, scattered across the globe after the great explosion. So you remember the moon clipper was the one that Pitch destroyed, and then the moon's mother and father perished in the explosion, and the ship became our moon, and that is where Tsar Lunar lives. Sends moonbeams down to give us good dreams, light our way. And in his reading, Ombric discovered that 5 relics of the moon clipper had fallen to Earth, scattered across the globe after the great explosion. But, Ombric reasoned, they were brought together. They could hold great power, a far greater power than that of the wisps of ancient stardust that had enriched the ground of Santoff Clausen, and perhaps even greater power than that of the moonbeams. Ombric had been tracing the location of the 5 pieces. "We must gather the closest first," he murmured, rolling a chart back up and tying it with a thin leather cord. But he alone knew that getting to the first stop would be the most dangerous journey of his long life. The most dangerous journey of his very long life. Chapter 15, partly cloudy and mostly unfair. The genie had become the undisputed center of excitement in the village. It was able to do almost any task it was asked. "Genie, can you move these boulders?" asked one of old William's sons. "Not as old William." "I was thinking of making a new tower. So that's one of old William's sons. His name is not as old William. And he tells Genie, I was thinking of making a new tower. As you command, replied the mechanical man, and in minutes it had assembled quite artfully the hulking stones into a splendid tower, complete with turrets. Other villagers made requests of the genie, but one day Catherine had a request she desperately wanted to make, and North could read her impatience. Genie, the lass will explode if she doesn't get her turn next, he boomed. Catherine bounced on her toes in anticipation. She'd been drawing pictures of the jumping cow North had told them about and wondered what it had seen when it had leaped in the sky. The jumping cow. Remember that? Where did the cow jump to? The genie turned to her and she asked excitedly, Genie, can you throw me as high into the air as you can and catch me? As you commanded, answered, and quite effortlessly it tossed Catherine so high that the villagers lost sight of her. They peered into the sky worriedly, North using a telescope of his own design. There she is, he said at last, pointing to the small bank of clouds Catherine was gleefully skimming over. Though the others watched uneasily, Catherine was delighted by her sudden journey into the atmosphere. She'd soared above the tallest trees in Santoff Clausen and past a flock of startled geese. She soared higher than she had even imagined. Below her, Santoff Clausen looked rather small and the outside very large and inviting. She trusted the genie to catch her. After all, North had made it. Then floating just a few feet in front of her was a small cloud, not much bigger than a feather bed. On that cloud, to her complete and utter surprise, crouched a boy. The same boy who had come to their rescue back in the forest. He was looking right at her. Catherine gasped. She had seen him only that one time, in daylight. He shimmered even more brilliantly. He looked as if he were made of light and mist, like a breath on a cold winter's night. And how was it that he could stand on a cloud? She stared, stunned. They had only a single second together. She smiled at him. He smiled back. She reached out her hand and he did as well. Their fingertips were just about to touch. Then she began to drop. Whereas going up had been a delicious mix of terror and glee for Catherine. Falling the rest of the way back down was entirely different. She was so deep in thought about the strange enchanted boy that she was barely aware that she was hurtling toward earth, nor did she notice Ombric emerge from Big Root, lean on his staff and watch. She landed, to North's great relief, gently and comfortably in the genie's outstretched arms. A wisp of wind touched her cheek, and she glanced up toward the small cloud once more. I knew it'd catch her. I built it that way, North blustered as everyone cheered. But that didn't stop his heart from pounding until the genie tipped Catherine firmly onto the grass. What if it had missed her? Cried William, the almost younger, sounding a bit disappointed that things had gone so smoothly. Genie, I want to be able to become invisible, demanded William, the absolute youngest. Sunlight glinted off the genie's shoulders. It paused, then giving a sweeping bow, said, That is a wish I cannot grant. But why not? You're supposed to do anything we asked William, the almost younger. I am a genie of the possible. I can do anything a machine or mortal may, but more effectively. To make you invisible would take magic, and magic is only for those with the wisdom to wield its power. Then it bowed again humbly. Ombric gave a cough and strode up to the genie, hearing at every inch of it. As I was saying, Ombric gave a cough and strode up to the genie, peering at every inch of it. He did not say a word. The villagers held their breath, half expecting Ombric to be displeased, though they weren't sure why, and North had to bite his tongue entirely. Tough old bird, he thought. I'm sure he'll find fault. But to North's surprise, Ombric tapped at the genie's chest, traced a finger over the silver key, and pronounced, "An admirable piece of work. Well built and wisely conceived. It will be of great use for our journey." He turned to North and stamped his staff on the ground. "Nikolas, pack your things and ready your genie. We leave on a mission of greatest importance at dawn." Catherine glanced up. "Am I to come too?" The old wizard's face softened. "No, my girl." He took her hand. "You must stay here. I expect you to help the bear and Petrov to protect the village while we are gone." Catherine swallowed hard and agreed, but she was deeply disappointed. If adventures were to be had, she wanted to see them and drew them in her sketchbook. North felt disappointed for Catherine as well. There was nothing like an adventure to make the blood race and the cheeks flush. The genie, of course, could feel nothing. It was just a machine. But that would all change soon enough, and Catherine would have an adventure to match any in her young life. I think we'll pause there. And next installment will be chapter 16, Anger, Age, and Fear Make an Unwanted Appearance.